It's time now for newspaper review. Let's review the headlines of today's newspapers with the ombudsman of Thisday and Rights Media Group and Thisday Newspaper Limited's Group Executive Director, Kaide Komolafe. Good morning, KK. Happy Sunday.
Good morning, Adeso.
Good morning,
KK. Good morning, Steve.
Yeah. Good morning. Good to have you.
It's the Sunday after election, so I think we're going to start with...
Absolutely. We'll start with this day. And of course, it's all about the elections, largely, practically in all the
front pages.
Front pages. This day captures it this way for its lead story. It says APC in early lead as INEC collates results of FCT polls amid low turnout. The riders explains, basically, all the issues that have arisen with the Abuja election. Amupiton Wike commend peaceful, orderly elections. I impose curfew with Tinubu's approval. FC Minister replies King Gibe decries low turnout. ADC slams Wike over alleged interference in FCT polls. IREF not displaying results. Obedient movement alleges. All these stories are on page 5 of today's paper. And then on top of the lead story, after Tinubu's executive order on direct remittance, federal government moves to probe past revenue collections, demands full compliance from NNPC, NUPRC, others. NNPC, Dangote Refinery, renew strategic alliance. I think that other story of NNPC and Dangote has to do with the picture on the cover showing Alhaji Aliko Dangote with the MD of the NNPC Limited. We took a story from that visit earlier in the program. And this had some, strong positions about the president's executive order on direct remittances, particularly in the areas that people perceive run foul of the provisions of the PIA. Is it?
Yes.
The PIA law, but of course there are other arguments as to the PIA may not also be superior to certain components of the constitution, which gives every proceeds of oil or something like that to the federation account. A few other stories, still elections, but this time around, what will come later. APC holds local government congresses in Lagos, Ondo, Gombe, Enugu, Katsina, and other places. That story you can find on page 6. And on the window, amidst tight monetary policy, Stanbic IBTC, FCMB, 3 other banks' reserves with CBN rise to 6.9 trillion naira. That shows strength. That's quite positive. That story is also on page 5 of today's paper. So those are actually the stories, KK. The APC in early lead, Abuja elections, and then Tinubu, after Tinubu's executive order on direct remittances, FG will most likely move to probe past revenue collections, all the 30% here and the 20%, retention there. What have you been doing with all the money? Huge money running into billions, if not trillions. Those are the stories on the cover of this day, KK.
Okay, I think it's today's. If you look at the front pages, it's a political.
The morning after elections.
Yeah, after elections. So we should take the front page story, the lead story of this day on Sunday, which is about the election in the 6 local government council in the FCT. Now the results, are just coming in, but beyond the results, we should also look at the context, of the election, and just signpost maybe 2 or 3 important things briefly. One is that it's significant that, as this day on Sunday has reported, no fewer than 10 political parties participated in this election. So that in itself is an affirmation that, at least even though it's a very local election, that we are running a multi-party democracy and not a one-party state. 2 is also the fact that there is what you could call if you like now, is a sub point of our democratic process that, election after election, there is always this deficit recorded, and that is the low voter turnout. Democracy is deepened when it is participatory. And you cannot, a democratic process cannot cannot be described as participatory, sufficiently if majority, because after all, the democratic decision is the will of the majority. Yes. And that is, while everybody may not agree, if you don't have consensus, will of the majority. But how can you talk of the will of the majority when majority of those who have registered to vote, are not voting? Exactly. Because if you are recording more people who stay away, And so if majority of those who are qualified to vote, who have actually registered, showed interest, to vote, are not voting, so in reality, can we actually call the will of the majority? So there is a huge deficit in the democratic process, and it's a challenge, to political parties, the one that is in power at every level of government. At every tier of government, and those who are, bidding to have power. That their duty, that political parties do not just exist, just to fill, to present candidates for election, which is what has been reduced to that. Part of it is, mobilization, of people, voter education, mobilization of people to be interested, to participate in the democratic process, because that is the only way by which people can actually take control of the process. People cannot take control of the process when they stay away. It is when they are involved that when people talk of the people, the power of the people, with their votes. There is this probability that your voter, the voter's card is your power, is the weapon that you have. So if you have the weapon and you keep it, and you don't use it on the election day, it's of no effect. Beyond political parties, it's also a challenge, to civil society organizations, to different institutions that are interested in deepening the democratic culture. I think that should worry, all. The third point, by way of observation, about what is going is the World Congresses, taking place, which is an intra-party affair of APC. It is worrisome that in some places, violence, has been reported. When you are dealing just, strictly, an intra-party affair. For instance, in Ondo State, I think about 2 people, were reportedly killed. Yes. People injured. In Delta State, there were, reports of violence, and in other parts of the country. I think this should worry the party leadership. Sure. That violence cannot be legitimized, as part of the democratic process. That elections, at every level, whether intra-party or inter-party, should be a festival, democracy, and it should be conducted in such a way that it will deepen the democratic process.
Correct. Yes, let's quickly take Thisday style before we move on to the next newspaper. On the cover of Thisday Style today is Greg Ogbuefu advancing the blue economy. He's celebrating, I believe, his 75th birthday. Looks very young for 75. Very dashing on the cover of Thisday Style. Says long before local content entered Nigeria's policy vocabulary and long before blue economy became a global development buzzword, engineer Greg Ogbuefu was already doing the work, building ships, building companies, building capacity, and in many ways, building a future for a country that had not yet been imagined. Talks about an industry that was dominated by foreign players, and he carved out a room for indigenous excellence through technical mastery, strategic daring, and unwavering belief that Nigerians could lead on their own waters. Greg Ogbuefu at 75. The story is in Thisday Style. Very interesting interview there about a pioneer in the blue economy.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Congratulations to him.
Yes, congratulations to Mr. Egbe. And I agree with you, this one, that he looks more a 45-year-old man than a 75-year-old man. And,
look at that. I mean, who would want to look like this at 75?
You know what?
Dashing, debonair.
And we should be proud of him for his remarkable achievement in the blue economy.
Absolutely. And you've always known my position, KK, when it comes to, OG knows too, and I'm sure this were, celebrating age and longevity, the Elders Club, 70, 75, 80, 85. Each time I run into that, particularly on the cover of Style or, in newspapers, something applauds, that milestone, for me. And I do congratulate Mr. Greg, Obeyfun, the same way that I do congratulate who, hit 70 today too. Yeah. I'm sure KK, you know him, the founder of Xenox, Leo Stan, our own Mr. Leo.
He's my in-law.
Okay, he's your in-law. He's a friend of the media,
very proud of him,
who has also done very well in the, indigenous technology space with Xenox. He's 70 today, by the way. I believe that he's...
And he has this saying that a country cannot be said to be independent if it's not independent, in technology.
Absolutely.
That we have to develop our own technological capacity.
Absolutely.
Before we can talk of independence. So it's happy birthday.
Happy 70th birthday to
That's a very good one.
That's a good payoff line there from the birthday boy who's 70 today.
Should we quickly take Sunday Vanguard, or you want to take the punch? Sunday Vanguard.
Going to Vanguard, yes.
Sunday Vanguard has a very interesting story on top of the masthead. There says 2027 city village boys set stage for new face-off. This is a new Tinubu Obi face-off. We're going to have the city boys on one side and the village boys
but the city
on
boys,
the other.
We know who are the village boys.
Well, time will tell. Main story there, the lead story on the Vanguard, is a story that we actually see in Thisday and another paper. It's by Femi Fani-Kayode. He's writing about Nasir El-Rufai as a threat to national security. I believe that one is a multiple paper. El-Rufai versus Nuhu Ribadu.
You're not trying to draw KK into territory that he would like to go into. Is it not interesting though, KK? That the gentleman whom the president, called, invited basically, I believe was it when he went to Kaduna or Kano during the election and said, I won't be doing this if Nasir, is not part of it. And we saw him join the movement. At Chatham House, he picked one of the questions. But then those who used to be the bashers of the Jagaban are now the ambassadors designate.
The chief cheerleaders. Part of what Fani Fani-Kayode says is that you can't disrespect or pour venom on the person of the vice president or the president. And I want to remind everyone again.
Interesting.
From him, it's, what's the word we would use there? Hypocritical, I think. But aside from that, I always like to remind people that although we do want public discourse that's very polite, he can say whatever he wishes, and it might not be a threat to national security. But I expect this is still going to be a developing story. Last I checked, I think he's now with who? DSS?
With the DSS.
First was ICPC, then it was the EFCC, now it's the DSS. I think they're going to be playing musical chairs until someone finds a charge that sticks.
KK, on the cover of Sunday Punch today, they're basically announcing, that in 2027, INEC to unveil new timetable. And the commission is saying that we will revise schedule after reviewing Electoral Act 2026, which basically will be suggesting that the elections will come a bit earlier, given that because of the Ramadan that might come at the beginning of February or something like that.
And we've also reduced...
even January.
Or even January.
But we've also reduced the Senate has helped us reduce it from 365 days to 300 days notice.
Which is for the dates of announcement. Yes. But the elections holding themselves. It therefore would mean that maybe the first election, the presidential, might be first weekend in January, and then 2 weeks after for the governorship and the other one. Because to bring it backwards would therefore mean that you now have to deal with the Christian saying, there will be Christmas, there will be
Easter. I'm talking of Easter. Yeah.
No. For the elections, I'm saying that if they had to move backwards to December, they will have to contend with the Christmas period you know, if it falls on the weekend or not, or the new year. But
I understand.
You know, I'm not sure if religion should be playing this sort of a role when it comes to fixing date and etc. Maybe it also comes back to the sort of argument we should be having, KK, regarding actual electronic voting, rather spending a whole day, you know, at the polls. Your thoughts very quickly so that we can wrap up. Our time is limited today.
I think the advice to INEC that is very careful so that the timetable is well designed,
Yes.
you know, so that we don't have a problem, a bit confusion by the time you're having the election.
Exactly.
And also, of course, good enough professor. I'm putting as a professor of law, you know, to also, you know, look at the small prints, you know, of the provisions of the law, so that you know the Electoral Act as well as the Constitution, you know, is are complied with, you know, with whatever timetable it comes with. But it's actually expected that given the new, the amended, you know, electoral law, that the INEC just has to, you know, tinker with the timetable. Exactly. But it should be done in such a way that there is a strict compliance, you know, with the law, you know, so that we don't have a crisis when it is election time.
Now that politics is in the air, KK,
yes.
I'm sure you have to bear with the editors who will now be loading your cover pages.
Yeah. You have won.
We're politically interested.
You have won.
All right. Thank you so much, KK, for joining us on the morning show.
Pleasure to be here.
We do appreciate it.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the end of the morning show today. Thank you for watching, and do stay safe. I'm Steve Ayorinde.
Well, I'm Adesu Agiwa Sage, and from my entire team here in Lagos, Nigeria, enjoy the rest of your morning and, of course, the rest of your day.